Now, hello, host Eric here. I'm here with Bo, with Zachary. I've got my second respondee to me, and it in this evening's occasions. Having talked with Bo already, now we're going to hear from not host Mark, about whom I made kind of a harshly titled and perhaps kind of harshly bodied video. Let's hear what he has to say about it. You have the floor.
Okay, so Eric, I will concede a point. I concede that like theonomy makes the most amount of sense if I were to have a Christian framework for politics. I would say that honor your father and mother. There should be some sort of law there. Now I don't know how that law would necessarily be enforced. I think we do have some sort of freedom there. I don't necessarily know exactly how that would play out, but I would say that law would have to be somewhere in there, primarily based upon. There's a few passages, but Deuteronomy 4:6 says, "Observe them carefully, for this will show your wisdom and understanding to the nations, who will hear about all of these decrees and say, surely this great nation is wise and an understanding people. What other nation is so great as to have their gods near them, the way the Lord our God is near us wherever we pray to Him? And what other nation is so great as to have such righteous decrees and laws as this body of laws I am setting before you today?" And then Matthew 15:4 says, "For God said, honor your father and mother, and anyone who curses their father or mother is to be put to death." But you say that if anyone declares that what might have been used to help their father or mother is devoted to God, they are not honoring their father or mother with it. Thus you nullify the word of God for the sake of your tradition. So that's not necessarily saying that you should get the death penalty. It's saying that this is a case law, so the highest penalty for such a crime would be death. But that's not necessarily what the most common or the most practiced penalty would be. In your video, you said, I'm not protecting my conclusions, rather, I'm protecting my conclusions rather than the process of truth routine, is what you said.
Yeah.
So I would say that you are also doing the same thing, because you're using God, or like what your definition of God, I wouldn't call it God. I would say that you should use a different word, like magical thinking trick or something, because you're using it for the benefit rather than going through the process of how you came to that understanding of why it works. Like how and why are they useful? Why can you use these tricks? And are they logically based, is what my questions would be to you about that. I don't know if you want to answer that now, or I can keep going.
The last question is no.
Okay. Which is another point I was going to talk to you about. I can talk to you about that right now if you want.
I mean, you still have the floor. If you want to respond to anything in the video, go ahead and do that before we engage in discourse about it. I mean,
You said there's no deductive argument for the invisible realm, which I assume would include God, correct?
I didn't say there's no deductive argument for the invisible realm. I'm pretty sure.
I just said inductive. You did say one of those.
Did I say invisible realm?
Yeah, invisible reality is what the words you might have used. Invisible reality.
I mean, if I use those words, I might have used those words. There's no deductive argument for an invisible reality. I don't mean it literally, like visible. I don't know what I mean by that exactly. If you're saying there's no deductive argument for your God, that's true.
Well, here's what I would say about that. All deductive arguments are made from induction. That is to say, if I said, all men are mortal, and Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. It's a logically valid statement. But when I say that all men are mortal, that is based on induction. That's based on my experience of reality. That's based upon everyone that I've met in my own life. And everyone that I have met is mortal. That is not to say that I've met everyone in the past, or I've met everyone that lives on the earth right now, or I will meet everyone that will live. And I can't see if those people will be mortal, or if they have been mortal, or if they are mortal right now completely and truthfully. It's all based on induction about what I've seen personally.
Okay, but no, you're wrong about that, first of all. It's about definition. That's why it's process, not truth-driven. That's why you can have a valid argument with false statements, right? But my point would be this: if in fact you can prove God with reason, then isn't reason God? Because reason subsumes everything, including God.
Right. So, reason
I-
is God. Its nature would be reason. Yes.
I mean, it would seem to exceed the scope of any of humans of man's paradigms to be able to successfully define that which definitionally exceeds all definition and
Well,
subsumes all things.
if I used reason to convince you that a water bottle exists or something, then it doesn't make the water bottle those reasons for its existence. The water bottle still is an entity.
But his point is that the logical conclusion to draw that you should be an absolutist, and that you should be an absolutist for logical reasons, and the logical reasons lead you to the absolutism of Christianity.
Well, I'm not talking about Christianity per se right now. I would think we need to establish a personal God first before we get into Christianity. That's a whole other step.
Okay, but you dispute the definitional difference that we have on faith and logic here, right? So my point about faith is that faith necessitates believing in the absence of or in the face of contrary evidence. So you don't like that definition. So let's resolve that first. What do you define faith as?
What's that? Faith? I think it's belief, but I also think it's based upon reason. It's based upon reason. It's based upon your experience. It's based upon a lot of things. It's not based upon just believing, even though there's a lack of evidence there.
Does it require faith to believe in this, that I'm drinking this cup of coffee? Does that require faith?
It requires faith to believe that it exists beyond your subjective experience.
Correct. Like, you have to under cup is different than you, and it's outside of you.
I'm not making claims beyond my subjective experience because it's within my subjective experience. Right?
Well, then you can say that it exists within your subjective experience.
Right, it exists right now, right? I can make that claim, yes?
Sure.
Okay, so what then is faithful about it?
Well, okay, so that's my point. Is like your framework, your absolute framework, quote unquote. I don't agree that it's absolute because it's contingent upon being born. First off, second off, you have to understand that the outside world is different than yourself. That the outside world is not you. And then you have the third point is like you have to understand that you don't own your own body.
Yeah, you do. But first of all, the first thing you said, hold on. The first thing you said, though, wait, let's go back to the first thing you said for a second. Because you said, repeat the first one again.
You're contingent upon being, like, your framework is contingent upon being born itself.
Yes, because it's a framework by which moral agents can determine moral issues on a group level for policy decisions, right? It's, remember the framework limitations.
The morals don't exist outside of people.
They may, no, for policy purposes, my point is, right, that for policy purposes, we have to understand what counts as a reason that passes the reciprocal burdens test and what doesn't count as that. What counts as failing the reciprocal burdens test. You're trying to claim that something that objectively fails the reciprocal burdens test is actually passing it. Because you're saying I should be able to justify. Yeah, because you're saying I should be able to justify legislation with my religion, and you should agree with that. It's a good idea to pass this legislation because of the reasons I provide you, namely my religion. But if that's the case, if in fact we should be able to determine legislation on our religions, then my religion can be used to justify whatever legislation I want, and somebody else's religion can be used to justify whatever legislation they want. And you say, yeah, but my religion is the true one. And I'd point out, well, nobody agrees with that, or not everybody agrees with that. You'd say, well, that's just an appeal to popular sentiment. But in fact, as I pointed out, that's not what's happening here at all, right? It's not me appealing to popular sentiment. It's that you don't have a logical argument that's going to say, my religion is the true religion and everybody else's religion is false.
If I brought in another person that believes in negative rights framework, would they agree with you on everything?
Of course not. But they'd agree they'd agree on the core. They'd agree on the core point of non-transgression.
And I would say that a Christian would agree that when it says "thou shalt not kill," it means don't kill. You know, there are certain things that Christians do agree on, and there is a reference point, so it's not subjective. there's a reference point that we can look at that is objective.
But what if a
that's fair.
non-Christian wants to use their religion to justify something? Do we have to listen to them too?
Well, we would have some sort of framing of reference point, but we wouldn't have the frame of reference point as the commandments in the Christian Bible. And so, I mean, therefore, like, no, we wouldn't. But then again, that's like saying, would a communist agree with your negative rights framework? Like, no, they're two totally different positions.
But
so,
listen,
no,
I'm not talking about. You keep talking about. You're mistaking positions for vectors of argumentation. What I'm pointing out is not that your religious point is right or wrong or something. It's that it cannot be used as a vector of argumentation in policymaking decisions, because if it is, the legitimacy of it, which stems from an old book, and the supremacy of that old book is not something that can be definitively determined.
You can't say something's old, therefore it's false. So
hold on. Just because I describe a book as old doesn't mean that's my warrant. All right?
No, it's not. That's what you're gonna sway people that way for no reason. You don't even need to say that it's old.
Now listen here, not host Mark.
Okay,
What I am pointing out to you, sir, is that the reason that you believe should be allowed to be used for public policy is your religious beliefs, including, among other things, personal revelation. But if that warrant is acceptable to force people to do shit at gunpoint, then that warrant's acceptable for me too. That's the problem you're facing. That's why it fails the reciprocal burdens test. You're ignoring this point. I don't know why. Do you want a strict Muslim cleric to say, I get to be justified in what I say to do because of my religion? Or do you want to say, no, they're fucked up, they're wrong? Not because their religion's wrong, but because they are violating rights. That's universal. See the difference?
I don't think you see what I'm saying. The universal rights come from God. So therefore, Christianity has those universal rights.
But
so if you are disagreeing with it, then you are disagreeing with those universal rights.
No, I'm saying you can't use that argument in public policy. Not that it's wrong. Do you understand the difference?
Wait, hold on.
Oh, I can't understand that difference because I don't have that distinction. There's no distinction for me because I'm a Christian. There's no distinction between them.
There's no distinction between you and making an argument and believing something. So making an argument that everybody should be forced to do this and believing is good for yourself. There's no distinction between those two things. Are you serious?
Well, can you repeat that? Because
Are you telling me that you make no distinction between truths that are true for myself, that are not true for public policy, and other truths that are acceptable for public policy, because I understand the distinction between that which is acceptable to force myself to do and that which is acceptable to force other people to do? Are you telling me you fail to make that distinction?
There is no distinction there because what is true for me is universal. So, like that's universal. So those universals apply to politics as well. So that applies to the public policy. I don't have my own opinion, my own personal morals. No, like I believe that they are universal morals, and therefore they are applicable to politics.
Well, okay, what would be an example of some of these universals?
Like honor your father and mother, for instance, which I said before it shouldn't be, but I conceded that.
We're ignoring the point, though. It doesn't matter what your positions are. It matters how you justify them. I'm saying that's not an adequate justification for the positions, not that the positions themselves are bad. And you keep saying, well, there's no difference for me. Well, of course there's a difference, because if I say to you, here, take this aspirin because it'll help you feel better, that's one reason to take the aspirin. If I say, here, take this aspirin because I poisoned and it's going to kill you, that's a very different reason. And the action's the same.
Well, I would say that a personal God has communicated with man, and if he has communicated with man and has told us what to do, then we should do those things.
Yes, and you can believe that all you want, but if you're advocating that those personal religious beliefs are good enough justifications for winning arguments about public policy, then you do not understand the difference between that which is a justification for something and that which is an expression of a spiritual belief.
Right, there is no distinction for a Christian.
There's no distinction for you. Now, you've already come in, Mr. Christian, and denied my God's existence. So, I mean, I don't know why. I don't know why you'd come in and deny my God's existence. I don't know why you think my God doesn't count as God. I don't know
Not God.
how anybody could be so unbelievably presumptuous to display such hubris as to presume that they know another individual's relationship with God better than that individual does. But you apparently do think that. So, we already know that we don't agree about God, right? You don't even think my God counts as a real God. So my point is,
Right.
then how come I don't get to? Can I use my not real God to justify public policy or not?
No, you can't use them to justify public policy.
Why can you
Why not?
use yours?
Mine is true.
Okay, but you see, you can't. If you could logically prove God, then you've made reason God. Because if reason subsumes all else, including God, which is bigger than the set of all things, right? Definitionally, then what we have here is an individual who's somehow tried to collapse into a single holon two disparate things and make magical thinking into logic. It's not that, and your spell's not working. You're full of shit if you think it is. This does not pass any reciprocal burdens test. There is no way in hell that simply because you believe your religion is true, that therefore it's an adequate justification for public policy that forces at gunpoint other people to do shit they don't want to do. You think it's okay. That makes you incredibly wrong.
No, I definitely think it's the better position to be had.
I know you
If
do.
God communicates-
I know you do.
If
Because
that
you
makes-
don't hold yourself
that
to any
makes
sort of
sense.
reciprocal burden standards either. You don't hold yourself to any sort of objective standard. That's why.
Why should we use logic in government?
Well, according to you, if we do, it requires us to be Christians.
Well, my point is, why should we use logic? Well, because logic. I mean, when you get down to that point, it becomes circular. So there's certain things that you have to accept. I accept that God has communicated with us. There's a point when you need to just get down to a point where you have to accept something. What you're doing.
The point about having a debate is to agree on the premises to begin with. Agree with the resolution. You're taking as assumption shit that's not facts, and facts are not in evidence. You're assuming shit that is not in evidence. Period.
You're assuming that the outside world is different than you, and you're also assuming that you own your own body.
And I ask you for an alternative.
I have a question. If he doesn't own his own body, who does?
I don't think.
I'm minded of that. Why does the king own you? Why doesn't the president own you? Why doesn't your father own you?
Yeah, ownership is just a concept by which we define property rights.
Right, you have to get right. So you have to defend that. Why do I own my own body?
Well, wait. What did you say, Bo?
Crazy.
Ownership is
nonsense.
just the way we defend property rights.
Ownership
Okay.
is the concept of property rights.
You said that
We have to actively enforce it, though. It's not as if it enforces itself.
Nope,
We have
wrong,
to do it.
wrong. In the natural state of things, everyone respects each other's property rights. It is only when one transgresses upon another's property rights are violated. You're wrong.
It doesn't matter if it's natural. It doesn't matter if it's against the law or not. It's
Bo, let's not get sidetracked. I'm busy arguing with not host Mark. I don't want to get sidetracked with your socialist nonsense. Go ahead, not host Mark.
So why do I own my own body, and why should I assume that, or why should I believe that? Have
Well-
faith in that, if you will.
You act like you own your own body, and you're unable to hand ownership over to anybody else because you can't actually give your will to another human being. You can follow their orders, but you can't actually turn over the keys and have their consciousness driving the bus, right? So that's why you can't be owned by another human being, because it's not a piece of property you have the capacity to transfer. Now, we know you are owned. We know you are owned, in fact, for the simple reality that you are an object in space and therefore subject to ownership. And if you're not owned, then you can be homesteaded. Now, I don't think you want to be homesteaded. Now, you haven't presented any alternative to you owning your own body, and therefore, I'm going to have to assume the point stands.
I could be reminded of that. How do I know there's stuff? How do I know there's matter
Okay,
there?
now
to
you
be
want to
owned?
collapse the skep. We've been through this fucking loop before. You're not listening to me.
After those
You
things,
only
I have
own your
to know
body.
that I have a body that I can own, and I do own it.
Can I say something?
Why
Can I say
doesn't
something?
Go ahead, Bo.
You only own your body only as much as you can enforce your restrictions on it.
No, Bo. You own
Yes.
your body, and yet, in fact, your ownership rights are subject to violation. Bad people can violate your rights. It's true.
One body. Who owns that body? What if there are two minds in one body? Who owns it? Where is the ownership of the You need a foundational concept of
Bo,
identity. To
Bo,
do it. If
Bo,
there is no identity, then there is no ownership.
Bo, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it, okay? At the moment, we don't have that problem. So,
But what about someone who's unconscious? Do they still own their own body, Art?
well, I mean, look, there are a lot of consent-related issues that I think it's fair for the legislation to define, to codify into law, you know? Like, what constitutes consent? When can you consent? What can be done to you when you can't consent? All of those sort of things are, I think, legitimate causes for legislative definition.
So it's subjective, legislative definition.
Well, put it this way. Is it subjective? It would have to be consistent with the limiting principle, of which, again, you haven't provided me an alternative to you owning your own body. What's the alternative?
I don't own my own body.
Who
That's
owns
the
it?
alternative.
Who owns it?
The king, my mom, my dad, my brother, the,
Okay, so
the dog.
which one?
I don't know.
Which one? Because I want them to sell it to me. Which one owns it?
You want them to sell it to you?
No, I want the owner to sell it to me. Not them. I want the owner to sell it to me. Unless it's owned by a partnership or something. Is it? My
You
LLC
can
owns
keep
it?
control of it if you wanted to. It's just the fact that you have to impose yourself on it.
Well, that's
You can
theft.
take
That's
control.
theft, Bo. Yes, it's true, Bo. People can commit crimes. That's true. Congratulations. You made another wonderful observation. Now, getting back to the point. So, who owns it? I want to buy it from them.
Are you asking me for my answer, or are you asking
Yeah,
me
I'm asking you
my
for your
skeptical-
answer. Who owns your body then? I want to buy it from them. It's not you.
Well, God told us that we do own our own body.
So why are you
I mean,
telling
I'll
me
play-
it's your mom or your dad or your sister or something?
That's what you have to prove that. I'm talking from your framework.
No,
You have no
hold
way.
on. Whip, 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 whip. I've been giving you my warrants for why you own your own body. You've not answered any of them, and you said it might be the case that the king owns your body, but you provided no warrants for that. I provided warrants for my claim. It's still standing. You haven't answered it. Get to it, buddy.
Okay, so how do I know I'm not a mind in a vat?
That's not answering my point or my question, right?
How do I know I don't have a body
We are,
and everyone's...
you want to shift, levels and collapse the skepticism when I pin you down on a point, but then return back above skepticism to make your own points. That's called failing the reciprocal burdens test. You don't get to do that. If you get to collapse the skep, then I get to collapse the skep and your God point dies.
Okay. Told me. God relayed that information to me.
Okay, so now you're not collapsing the skep anymore? Or what? Are you
said
collapsing the skepticism or not?
I'm giving you an answer for your skep. I'm saying God...
I don't have
talked-
skepticism. I'm not arguing skepticism. You are. You're saying, well, how do you know you're not brain in the vat? My point is, we're arguing as though we're not brains and vats here. And you're continuing to argue that your arbitrary bullshit religious reasons ought to be used to justify public policy that points guns at people. I'm telling you that's awful and that God disapproves.
He doesn't disprove. I just gave you two scriptures where he says he doesn't. I can give you more if you want.
No thanks. All right. Thanks for watching Talk with Fed People. That's enough scripture for me.